52. Her name was Jane, British. So I can say it. It would seem so. That seems too specific to not have a that one guarantee would say everything yeah, no. Teacher in high school, but I only had her for like a year before. Because you're supposed to, in high school, your teacher was there for yeah. Yeah, but I like left after like a year because then I joined this for news. Other than that, my district's my history teacher. So this was I got it. So wait, what else? Discomfort had the fault to break. Yeah. Did someone like stomp on it? Did someone office space it? Yeah, really. Yeah. Lauren Scott came back to just break one last piece. Could you imagine if just did this? Oh, there it is.
Welcome. Please feel free, welcome. Oh, that was very nice. Hi, I'm Beth Cobbett. I am a associate professor here at Stevenson University, and I'm so excited that you're here. Look at you. Monday night, yay, 6 o'clock. How many of you put a full day in already? Look at that. And all of you are here to come talk about equity and improving the learning environment for students and learning opportunities for students. So we wanted to, first of all, thank our sponsors for tonight. And so I'm going to hand the mic over. Stevenson University School of Education, Teachers of Tomorrow. If you're a Teachers of Tomorrow club member, can you raise your hand? Woohoo! Can we clap for them? Stevenson University Kappa Delta Pi Honor Society, can we clap for them? Raise your hand. Woo-hoo! Thank you. The Association for Maryland Mathematics Teacher Educators is another sponsor for tonight. This is the president, Dr. Barbara Schwartz.
Good evening, and thank you for coming. It's, as Dr. Cobbett said, this is amazing to see so many people out on a Monday at dinner time. We have cookies. Eat your cookies before dinner. That's okay. Life's short. I just want to reach out and let everybody know, if you are a principal or supervisor or support mathematics teachers in any way, please consider yourself a math teacher educator. We want to expand our membership. On Saturday, we just had our 4th annual Early Career Teacher Conference with about 100 attendees. Half of them are pre-service teachers. teachers, and the other half were teachers up into their first 5 years. If you are a mathematics teacher, please consider yourself a math teacher educator by supporting your new or early career teachers, and come. It's an amazing experience. We had the best time. I'll give it over to the president of the Maryland Council of Teachers of Mathematics, Mr. John Hunter.
Thanks. It's so nice to see you again. I've recognized some faces from our conference this past October, and I'm thrilled that we had a chance to be here tonight and offer support for this fabulous event. We thank you for coming. We're glad you're here. This is what we are all about as far as NCTM is concerned. We want to give you great opportunities. We want to bring in nationally recognized speakers to help you do better at what you do every day in your classrooms, whether it's your first week or 31st year. So we're thrilled you're here. We would invite you to come this Saturday to an event. If you're an elementary school teacher, there's going to be some flyers in the back about a mini conference on the Eastern Shore. Please consider taking one and registering to come and see us again this Saturday, where we will again have food and fabulous professional development, because we're all about the food, around formative assessment in you. So thanks again for coming tonight. I'm going to hand the microphone back over to Dr. Cobbett so that we can hear the credentials of our fabulous speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. So I thanked you for coming, and I wanted to just tell a short story about how this all started. So hopefully you came in and you saw some books out there that you were able to write your name in and put it for grade level. And it's the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics Access and Equity series, and they're fantastic. And I opened up, I ordered them or picked them up, I think, at a conference, and I opened up the grades 3 through 5 to chapter 1, and I was spellbound. The name of the chapter was Confronting the Lies I Tell Myself, and I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop myself from reading it, and then I started, how many of you got an email from me about it almost instantaneously? Look at that. It was really, really powerful and impactful. So that's when I said, we got to get them here, we got to get this conversation going, and I felt that it helped us enter into a really, really good conversation about creating an accessible, positive, asset-based learning environment for each and every student. So here they are. You're like, stop talking, Beth. Okay. We have Rebekah Berlin, who taught for 5 years in Memphis, and she is currently pursuing her doctorate and going to defend her dissertation soon. So she's soon to be, yes, I know, it's always, you have to be careful about how you talk about it. Anyway, she is fantastic. And she spent the day with students that are in this classroom, and they can attest to how spectacular she is. So we're happy to have her. And then we have Dr. Robert Berry, who's the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics current president. He is also, and I was sharing with some other people that I feel so honored to be part of the board of directors, because I get to experience Robert's leadership, and his leadership is so thoughtful and positive and very, very deep, and so I really appreciate that. Robert has published over 100 articles. I mean, if I started reading his credentials, we'll never get to it, but I want you to know that his work is deep. Look him up. He's got lots and lots of research that is really amazing, and I think we're going to hear a little bit about it, right? Okay, fantastic. So without further ado, I turn it over to them. Thank you both for coming.
So we're planning as we walk you up, isn't that something? All right.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right. Let me try that again. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right, so one of the things I do, so you know, as Beth said, I'm president of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. And I recently wrote a president's message not too long ago. And typically when I'm in large crowds or working with, particularly when I work with students, one of the things I say to them is I greet them and I ask them, well, good afternoon, how are you doing? And the response I expect from that when I work with my boys is truly wonderful and getting better. All right? So I'm going to try this again. Good afternoon. How are you doing?
Truly wonderful and getting better.
All right, truly wonderful and getting better. So, and what that does for me in terms of when I think about an entry point for my students, because then I can ask, so you're truly wonderful. What makes you truly wonderful?
I had a good day at school today.
Had a good day of school today. And so those are the things, it gives me an entry point to have a conversation with students and learn about all the resources that they bring to the learning space. And what are you going to do to get better? What do you want to get better at?
Mathematics.
Get better at math. And so those are entry points. Those are entry points, and we try to find as many entry points in terms of connecting with people, and connecting with students. And so I'm actually now going to turn it over to Rebekah, and as I stated earlier, so I'm going to say this right now. This is Rebekah's show, all right? I'm just the sidekick tonight because the work that we did with this chapter really comes from work that, as we sat in my office and the paper that Rebekah was working on, we kind of formulated this idea, and her work as a teacher in Memphis, and I was, we were looking at the authors for the book, the chapter in the book that you guys may or may not have read. I was like, Rebekah, you got to do this. You have to do this. And so, actually, many of these ideas come from Rebekah's work, and I'm just kind of the sidekick in this work. Is that okay? All right, so I'm going to be the sidekick, and I'm going to turn it over to Rebekah, and then I'll insert myself where appropriate. All right?
Thank you, Robert. And those of you that got to experience me in your classroom today, you've seen some of these norms today, but we're going to be doing a lot of turning and talking to the people around you as we work through some different vignettes and do some guided reflection. And so before we start just jumping into that, I want to just talk about a couple quick norms. So the first one is if you have privilege in this space, so i.e. someone who looks like me, but whether that's due to your racial identity, your gender identity, your sexuality, you as an able-bodied person, thinking about what you bring to the conversation and how you're showing up in that conversation so that you're not dominating a conversation or taking it over so in ways that other people can't participate. So be aware of how much you're talking and how you're talking. Approach topics with humility. Use your mistakes as a learning opportunity, and embrace discomfort. Some of us may have been thinking and talking about these ideas our whole lives, but other people, again, like white people in the room, I'm talking to you. You may be newer to this, and so this may feel uncomfortable, and what we're gonna ask you is to hang in there with us. The second thing is just make sure that you're participating. No one knows everything, but together we know a lot, and so to gather that collective knowledge, we need to hear from you and we need your perspective.
So, in order to kind of move forward with this, one of the things that we want to think about is we're going to have some common language. I'm sorry, I'm a roamer, so forgive me if I'm moving. We're going to go over some vocabulary, and we're going to have some common language about some of the ideas. Some of these terms may be familiar to you, but I'm not going to make the assumption that they're familiar to everyone. So forgive me if I'm repeating some things that you may have heard already, but I want to make sure that we have a common understanding about some of the ideas that we're going to talk about a little later. And so the idea of asset and deficit approach to thinking about communities, families, and students. And so when we think about asset, one of the things we have to think about is that students carry valuable funds of knowledge. And one thing that I like to think about, what are the resources that students or children bring to the learning space? Forgive me for using the term children, because I think about sometimes the kids I work with. I work with 3rd graders through 8th graders in the summers, so I still think of them as children. And particularly, my work focuses on Black boys, and too often Black boys are not positioned as children. And so we have to think about, particularly with Black boys, as children. Because, if you think about some of, more recent and some of the issues that are happening around black boys, oftentimes they're positioned as being older than what they actually are, and often put in situations where they are at risk. And so I'm going to use the term children, particularly because it relates to my work. So students carry funds of knowledge into the classroom that will benefit them and those who they come in contact with. And when we think about funds of knowledge, we're thinking about those resources that they bring. Those are they're historical, they're communal, and they're familiar in terms of the family resources that they bring. They can be cultural as well. And so it is thinking about all of those things that situate their well-being and being productive in this space or in their community space. The other thing that I want us to think about is family and communities are valuable partners with expertise that can be leveraged to support student growth. And oftentimes, when we think about the resources of families and how we access families, too often what happens in schools, we access families at a time where they're needed. And one of the things that I'm thinking about our work this summer, so Beth and I, we had a board meeting, NCTM board meeting, this past weekend. And so when we think about families, I'm thinking about the work we do with advocacy. When you need a friend, don't approach a person when you need a friend. And so with families, don't approach a family when you need them. You make that connection so that you can build a relationship. It's about building relationships. So when we think about assets, we're thinking about those ideas that relate to identity, affirming identity, the gifts that family brings, the resources, the knowledge, the contribution to the sense of community. I mean, thinking about the broad participations of family and how we bring family into the space, recognizing as educators, sometimes we have power and we have privilege, and recognizing our power and privilege as we approach families. And I also understand the vulnerabilities that comes with that as educators as we interact and approach families. From a deficit, so when we think about from a deficit standpoint, and hopefully we don't take this approach, but when we think about sometimes from a deficit standpoint, we focus on what students cannot do. We also focus on families and communities needing fixing. And so going into spaces where you're going to fix a community, that is a deficit kind of positionality that one might take. And also thinking about expectations of families and community. How do we approach, so oftentimes it's lowered expectations, but how do we see families as resources and approaching families and communities as resources? And the other thing, different doesn't mean deficit. And I also like to say different doesn't mean deviant. And oftentimes, different is positioned as being deviant. And I think about that with my work with black boys. Sometimes black boys are positioned as being deviant when it is, we'll talk about, I'll go into a little bit depth of that a little bit later. But the difference does not mean deficit. So this is to me. I think it is. So here, take a look here. I want you to take a look here at this vignette. And you can read to yourself. It's also, so here we are. You are concerned about your students' progress in mathematics. You send a note home to their mother to set up a conference, but you get no response. Every time you call, a different relative picks up the phone and tells you that your student's mom is working. You try to catch this mother after school, but the student's always picked up by their brother or their cousin. Now, this is the opportunity I want you to turn to your shoulder partner, or you can trio up or pair up. I want you to think about how might this scenario be viewed through a deficit lens, asset lens point of view and a deficit point of view. And what are the implications of both as you think about the lens for our students? So I'm going to give you roughly 2 minutes to talk it over with your shoulder partner. Ready, set, and talk. 30 seconds. 30 seconds. All right. So one of the things I want us to kind of consider and think about, how can we think of this scenario from an asset point of view? Anybody want to offer any things that you talked about or shared with your show department? So I see a hand here from an asset point of view. Carol, right?
We had said that he has a lot of people that are really looking out for him.
Has a lot of people looking out for them. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Like he just has access to a lot of different people. That was kind of where we were going with it.
All right. And so having access to a lot of different people, how you as a teacher can use that?
We were kind of talking about how maybe it doesn't necessarily need to be his mom to kind of sit down and help him. Like it could be an older brother, an older cousin, like whoever is there.
So access in the community. Anybody else from an asset want to add to that? Okay. I'm sorry.
I'll just shout out.
Shout out. All right.
He comes from a hard-working family.
From a hard-working family. From a hard-working family.
One other. One other. There's going to be one other. Come on. Right here.
You might also say that you have the members of the family looking out for one another. So there's like a, some kind of camaraderie where they're, different ones are picking them up, different ones are answering the phone. So there's a lot of people there, but they're invested in each other.
So there's a lot of people there that are vested in the family. So there's this kind of communal space that's looking out for the student. What about from a deficit? Any ideas around deficit? All right.
If it's different people, it's no stability.
If it's different people,
It's no stability.
there's different people, there may not be stability. Anyone else want to add? Can you say it loud, proud?
Yeah. So I'm kind of new into this education world, but one thing I picked up already is that a lot of teachers seem to think that if the mother is not around all the time, they just don't care.
If the mother's not around all the time, they just don't care. All right, here.
One thing that popped into my mind is as far as like food administration, trying to find IEPs and Bible boards, the brother can't sign off on that. You need a mother, there present to help, take the step.
All right, so the question is IEPs, 504s, a parent may have to sign off on that, so you may need a parent there to sign off on that. So this idea from asset and deficit, because one of the things that we can think about in terms of, when we've talked about this before, one deficit lens is, well, the mother's working all the time. Sometimes I've heard there's an assumption because the mother's working there all the time that the student may not have the resources. And that may not be the case. And in fact, the student may have access to a bunch of resources. There are middle-class families who work all the time. And so when we think about it from a resource positioning, that is one way of thinking about from a deficit point of view. But also from an asset point of view, it is. There are many people that the teacher can reach out to. There are many people that can engage the student. Although it's not directly a parent-teacher type of conference, it is accessing those resources to support the student. It is the broad support that moves everyone forward. This is you. All right.
So we're going to talk about a couple of other things really quick, a couple of other quick terms. Some of you who were with me earlier today heard these terms. But bias, which is an individual's internalized but often unrealized preference for or assumptions about some group. So really quick with your partner or the people that you're sitting around, if you can talk about some examples of the way bias manifests in classrooms and how bias might be related to this idea of an asset versus deficit lens. We're going to give you 20 seconds. And bringing us back together. So I know that bias is an idea that comes up a lot, and it's in the media, and it's really easy to think about it as something that other people do, or that like bad teachers in bad classrooms do. But what we're really going to try and dig into tonight is the idea that this lives in all of us. And unless we examine it and confront it and figure out how to keep watch on it day in and day out, we're never going to be able to disrupt these patterns in our behavior, and especially for those of us who are educators, the way that impacts real kids in real classrooms. So I am going to briefly talk about this word privilege. So privilege is the ways in which an individual enjoys unearned advantages because of societal preference for some aspect of his or her identity. And so I gave this example earlier today, but when I was little, I got labeled as a gifted child, and I came home and I was like, "Thank you, here I am, your gifted child, mother." And she, like, my mom is very invested in keeping my feet firmly planted on the ground, and she was like, "Do you think that you're special?" And I was like, "Yes, and other people do too." And she was like, No. And we at this time lived in really rural Virginia, and she was like, "Let me be clear with you. You have someone who had the time to teach you how to read before you entered kindergarten." She was like, "You are not different than anybody else you go to school with. Other people's families had to work." And that hurts to hear, like, I'm maybe not as special as I thought I was. But then the result of that label is that I started to get to go on special field trips. I got put in special classes. I got tracked into like this honors track of classes, and when we moved to the suburbs, I was sent to a different school than the one I was supposed to go to because of my quote-unquote giftedness. And all of that accumulated to put me in, like, launched me to where I am today. And it's not that I didn't work hard or that I didn't try in school, but I also got this boost at the beginning that I did nothing to earn. And so this idea of privilege marries really tightly with this myth of meritocracy, which is the idea that is especially prevalent in the US of that we can pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, and if you work hard, you can make it in America. If I bought into that idea, I would think that the reason I am where I am right now is entirely because of my own hard work. And the kind of unstated part of that is that people who are not where I am didn't work as hard as me. And where that relates to my racial identity is then if I start to look around and say, oh, I notice most of the people in power have a white face like mine. If I see that as the result of their hard work and not as the result of systems that have been giving people this turbo boost their entire lives, then I can start to develop really harmful ideas that somehow white people are harder working or smarter than people of color, when that's just factually untrue. So, you on your seats have a packet of paper, and this question is not on that packet of paper, but if you want to use a margin to jot, I want you to take a minute to think about what's an unearned advantage you've had in your life, perhaps because of some aspect of your identity. And then the second is, how did it make you feel to call it an unearned advantage or privilege? Because I shared that with me, every time I've had to confront one of those, it's been like an ouch moment. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to write, and then we'll come back together.
All right. So you've had an opportunity to think about your unearned privilege, and it also makes me think about some of the things, me being in mathematics, and the earned privilege I have about being in mathematics is that people assume that I'm smart because I do mathematics. And I struggle with mathematics. I failed several courses in mathematics, and it is one of those things that that is an unearned privilege that's given to me because I have a relationship with mathematics. And so for me, it is that unearned privilege that, oh, you're in math, so you must be smart, and things of this sort. In the same way that people assume that my children must be smart in math, because my wife is a math teacher, and I do what I do, and so your kids must be really, really smart in math. Unfortunately, that's not the case. And in fact, so my kids do well in math, but growing up, their toys were math manipulatives. They had access to resources that other children did not have. So they had privileges that other children did not have. They had access to software that other children did not have. So is the experiential factor. The differences may be experiential, not cognitive. And so it is that experiential factor that comes into play as to why my kids may have done well in mathematics. And the fact that they have resources to people who do mathematics, access to resources to people who do mathematics. The next term I wanted to talk about is this idea of power. And when we think about power, it is the relationship that, oftentimes teachers are in a position of power as it relates to their relationship with students. And those power dynamics impact our relationships. So I just want you to take a moment to think about some of your power relationships, and so what power dynamics are at play in your relationship. How might these aspects of teacher and student identity influence the power dynamic? And what are the consequences of choosing not to reflect on your power in classroom. So I'm going to give you roughly 68 seconds to kind of talk about that. And if you're keeping time, wow. All right, go ahead, talk. So my estimation skills tell me that was about 68 seconds. And so when we think about power in mathematics teaching, one of the things that we have to think about that's related to power is this idea of authority. And when we think about authority, so I mean, being a math educator, one of the things I think about with authority is how do we distribute authority in mathematics classroom? That is, I want students to, when the power doesn't lie with me as a teacher and I distribute authority, I want students to engage with one another and engage with the mathematics and engage with me. But too often what happens sometimes in mathematics classroom, we don't know what's going to come out of a student's mouths. So we control the power relationship by sometimes doing what is called initiate, response, and evaluate, because we want to control the power relationship. When I say initiate, response, and evaluate, that's a discourse pattern in mathematics classroom. Teachers initiate a question, students respond to the question, and then the teacher evaluates students' response. Rather than thinking of a different way where students are engaging with one another, becoming creative thinkers about mathematics, and sharing their own ideas about the mathematics. And so that idea of distributed authority is actually a power relationship that plays out too often in mathematics classrooms because we want to control what students are going to say. We ask the question, we expect the response, and then we evaluate the response, sometimes based on correctness or not correctness. I'm going to turn it back to Rebekah. Here we go. So we're going to lead into this idea of confronting the lies.
So we're going into the second part of this, now that you have these background terms. The second part of this is going to be focused on confronting lies that we can tell ourselves as educators in mathematics classrooms. So this part is going to be based off of the chapter that Robert and I wrote, and we use this word lie for three reasons, and the word lie can be kind of jarring, but when we explicitly call out and name our behavior, it makes it so that we're way more, it's easier for us to recognize when we're engaging in that behavior in the future, and it also makes it easier for us to recognize when other people are doing the same thing, even people we care about, so that we can call it out. It also, the word lie implies that you're telling it to someone, so it allows us to think about what are the narratives I'm using to describe my behavior and in the classroom, and is it an accurate representation? And then the third thing is that word lie forces us to acknowledge the deceit and the harmful consequences of our behavior. So that's what we'll be talking about tonight. So in the chapter, I wrote about 3 lies that, and gave examples of vignettes from my classroom teaching. So I'm going to talk about each of those with you guys tonight, and then you're going to get the chance to look at some vignettes of different math teachers, and I'm going to be answering the same 5 questions over and over again about my different vignettes, and you're going to use those same 5 questions when you're decomposing some vignettes that you have in front of you. So this first lie was when I would say, I'm so sorry, I didn't even know. And an example of this from my first year of teaching was, I am a white woman. I taught at a school where all of my students were black. And there was a day during dismissal my first year, and I was just dead, and I was letting my students play with my hair. And I think that, first of all, there's questions about, like, why was I letting my children play with my hair? But they were playing with it, braiding it, telling me how it was so beautiful and I should never cut it. And a parent pulled me aside and was like, you need to stop. And I was kind of like, what? And she told me essentially that what I was doing was really problematic because of the way black girls are constantly messaged by the media that somehow they are not as beautiful as white women, and specifically that their hair is not as beautiful as white women. And my response was, like, rather than to actually engage with her, I just said, I'm so sorry, I didn't even know. I'm so sorry. And I just left it at that. So I'm going to kind of walk through some steps of decomposing this lie. So what I said is, I'm so sorry, I had no idea. Actually, the truth in that situation is that I have the skills to learn about my students, their families, and their cultural backgrounds. And not only do I have the skills, but it's my responsibility to acknowledge how much I don't know about those that are different than me, and then constantly work to fill in the gaps. And when I'm saying that, I'm not saying that, like, I am ever going to be an expert on my black female students' life experience in America or in schooling. But what I am saying is that as a teacher of black students, I had a responsibility to know about anything other than my white middle-class background, and to think about what their experience of school might be like. So there's these 5 questions that we're going to be using tonight, and I'm going to walk through how I answer them for this, and then you're going to apply them to some vignettes. So the first thing is, how did I abdicate responsibility, or who am I implying is responsible? When I say, I didn't know, I had no idea, I'm so sorry, what I'm saying is, first of all, it's not my fault, so you certainly can't blame me. And then by saying, I had no idea, I'm tacitly implying that it's the fault of the people that educated me, whether that's my parents, my friends, my school, any of these things. Basically, I'm saying somebody else probably should have told me this, but I didn't know. What are the implications of this for students? The implications in this situation is that I was harming my children's self-image. And so then when we think about what's a different way I could have responded, I think that I touched on this a moment ago, but I think a different way to respond would have been to, first of all, acknowledge the harm that I did, and acknowledge that I could have acted differently. And so I think I could have said that as a white woman who's responsible for approximately 50 black children every day, I could have done literally anything at all to learn about what their experience in school must have been like. And so, in terms of the implications of this, I think that had I begun to educate myself before I took that teaching job, that sort of gross microaggression probably would have never occurred. But if it had, and if I had owned up responsibility in the moment, it might have at least helped me somewhat repair my relationship with that parent, rather than just look like I was trying to dodge responsibility. The 5th thing is, how can I keep myself from doing this again? This is like my driver in all my classroom interactions. But there's a really famous quote about now that I know better, I do better. And I think the key for us in terms of reclaiming agency is setting yourself up to know better. So for me, what this looked like was I read everything I could get my hands on. And again, I do not claim at all that after reading books, watching movies, and talking to people that like somehow I have any sense of what it's like to be a black woman in America, but I do at least have a sense of very common experiences that children experience in schools that I know I do not want to repeat these for my students. So you are going to have a chance to go through these same 5 questions using the first vignette on the first page of your packet. So I'm going to give you about a minute of silence to read the vignette and collect your thoughts about the answers to these 5 questions. And then I'm going to give you 5 minutes to talk with the people around you about how this teacher might answer these questions if they wanted to reclaim some of their agency as a teacher and acknowledge their responsibility. And then if you want to go ahead and talk with your group and work through these 5 questions, I'll bring us back together in about 5 minutes. Gonna give you about 30 seconds. Okay, I'm going to bring us back together so we can talk through this a little bit. And I know that we are a big group, so I am going to try and run around with a microphone, but if I can't get to you, just shout from your belly and I'll repeat what you say so that everyone can hear. So the first question is, how is the teacher in this vignette, how are they abdicating responsibility, or who are they implying is responsible other than themselves? Yes?
Shot from my belly?
Yeah, that's perfect. That will make it easier for me.
So basically, she's putting all of the blame on the student, saying that he should have told her, he should have shared with her, so she's not accepting any responsibility, just putting it all on Andrew.
Yeah, exactly. So in case you couldn't hear that, she said that this teacher is putting all the responsibility on the student rather than on herself. That was beautiful. So what are the implications of this for the students in that classroom, both for Andrew and the other children in the room? Yes?
Andrew's being held to a higher expectation, a higher standard, so, and then therefore the other students are being held to a lower standard or lower expectation?
Yeah, so you're raising that this teacher is holding children to different standards in this room, which is problematic. What else is happening here for both for Andrew and for the other kids in the room? Yes.
I mean, she's perpetuating the stereotype, and I
Yes.
think when you see an adult perpetuate a stereotype, it reinforces that it's okay.
Yes, 100%. So not only is this harming Andrew, but something I want you to take away is that it also harms the other children in the room because they start to solidify these beliefs about Asian American students in mathematics. What is a different way this teacher could have responded? So something that allows them to take responsibility and acknowledge their agency in the classroom. I'm like, #wait time. Yes.
We said that she should have apologized and recognized the situation, acknowledged that there was some uncomfortable bias going on in the classroom. Did everybody hear that?
Yeah, so first of all, apologize and acknowledge what's going on. I think that is great. What else could this teacher do? Yes?
We were also saying that she should be meeting with the parents and the student to apologize directly to the student and assure him that he can be perfectly comfortable in coming to her with anything. Because there's one point that I remember reading that he felt that he didn't even understand the content.
Yeah.
That he didn't feel that he could tell her about it. Yeah. And on top of that, she should also have a conversation with the other students to remind them that we don't treat anybody differently in our classroom.
So you're raising a couple of different things. So the first one is you're suggesting that this teacher should meet, in addition to meeting with the parents, that this teacher also needs to meet with Andrew, the student, and apologize for what's going on. I absolutely agree with that. Another thing that you suggested was that this teacher needs to be explicit about what's going on with the other students in the classroom. And I think that this is where we get into the idea of how do we disrupt systems of power in our classroom if not doing anything solidifies for these children really stereotypical beliefs about Asian Americans, then being explicit about what's going on in the classroom and why it's not okay is what will help disrupt that in those students. So I think that that's a great point. The last thing is, how can this teacher keep themselves from doing this again? And I'm going to keep coming back to this question because I think this is how we change our own behavior as educators in the classroom, is we build a toolkit of strategies to force ourselves to reckon with this all the time. Yeah, so developing strategies to hold them accountable for how much they're calling on Andrew, and I think also from the comments that this teacher was saying to Andrew, also keeping track of what they say to Andrew, just period. And am I treating this child in the same way I would other children in the classroom? I think that's great. Yes?
Well, at one point it was saying how Andrew wasn't comfortable to come to the teacher, so I think the teacher really needs to analyze their culture in the classroom, and perhaps if Andrew's like anxious or shy to come up, they could create a system where he writes a note, or some type of system where he feels comfortable talking to the teacher.
Yeah. I think that that's a great example of like creating a concrete or tangible system of, okay, if people don't feel comfortable to me or talking to me, how can I create structures where they may feel more comfortable doing so? Yes.
Kind of going off of that, I was thinking the teacher having a certain place where all the students can kind of come to her and tell the teacher how they are feeling in the classroom, whether it be Andrew or any other student in the classroom.
Yeah. For the sake of time, I'm going to move us forward because we're going to do 2 more of these vignettes.
So one of the things that we have to think about as it relates to mathematics and think about, you know, with this scenario, we can think about instructional routines and how when we have instructional routines in our classroom, students know how to participate, when to participate, and the ways in which one participates. But going back to Rebekah and her initial vignette or her initial lie, let's think about this. So if Rebekah, she, being a math teacher, had trouble teaching fractions, she would know what to do to go find out how to improve her instruction on teaching fractions. So she may access resources, she may buy books, she may, you know, find different resources to help her improve her instruction on teaching fractions. So the analogy holds true if you have trouble interacting with students, or in this case, the parent who addressed her about touching, having kids touch her hair, and she didn't know why that's wrong, and trying to educate herself. So there's a certain amount of education that's analogous to that. Even when we think about teaching of fractions or teaching of content, we can draw the same analogy as it relates to funds of knowledge, community resources, and things of that sort. And so it is, how do we know what to do when it comes to content and teaching practices. Are there some parallels that we can begin to explore when it comes to accessing community resources, understanding community resources, and people and family within communities?
So I'm gonna really quickly talk through my second lie, and I'm gonna try and go fast because I'm keeping an eye on the time. But the second lie that I used, I especially loved this during my first year of teaching, was I did the best I could given the circumstances. And so in my first year of teaching, I was a brand new teacher, so I was, hopefully those of you who are studying to be teachers, you're better when you start than I was. But it was rough times, and I also worked in a school where, because the school system had been underserving the neighborhood for a long time, my students came to me really behind. And I also was required to use a district curriculum that took a really rote approach to mathematics. And I had an hour with my students, and they were required for 30 minutes of that hour to be on this computer program that they hated, and I also hated. And then in addition to that, I was required, because I was a first year teacher, to co-plan with another teacher in the building who really prioritized test prep and calculator shortcuts to help students do better on the standardized test. And then to top all of that off in my head, I found out that the other teachers on my grade team thought that I wouldn't last through the year, so they had quote unquote stacked my class and put the students with the most severe behavior and emotional needs in my classroom. And so I remember this one day where I had very poor classroom management, and I ended up having to take a knife off of a student, and I intercommed for the principal, and nothing happened, and I was like, oh, the intercom must be broken. And I went after school to talk to the principal, and she was just, I showed her the knife, and she was like, and she turned out to be a wonderful woman, but was stretched very, very thin, and I don't think was, I think that she may have also not thought I was going to make it through the year. And so at that point in time, the lie I started to tell myself was like, well, kids aren't learning, but they're also not dying, so I'm doing the best I can given the circumstances. And the reason why that is a lie, and I'm going to break that down in a second, but I actually, my first year of teaching may not look anything like yours, and it may seem like a drastic example, but I hear versions of that lie more than almost anything else. So I really want us to dig into what that means. So what I was saying is, it's not an ideal outcome, but I did the best I could given the circumstances. The truth is that all students can and want to learn, and you are being paid to figure out how to make that happen. So if students are not developing socially, emotionally, cognitively, you are responsible, and I was responsible for figuring out why that was and figuring out how to make it happen. And so I'm going to talk about what some of that looked like for me. So first, how did I abdicate responsibility? In that lie, when I'm saying I did the best I could given the circumstances, I am blaming the circumstances, whether that is the school system, the curriculum, who I had to plan with, all these different things. I'm putting it on anybody else but me. The implications of that for my students was that they weren't learning math, but they also literally were not physically safe in my classroom. So in terms of what is a different way to respond, what this looks like for me is I had to ruthlessly analyze my own teaching. So I started videotaping myself every single day and going home and looking at what was going on in my classroom. I wrote grants to get professional development. I asked other teachers in the building to come watch me and give me feedback. I basically latched onto anything I possibly could to figure out how to make myself better. Because what I realized outside of that lie is that it's not my kids, it's me, and a lot of times there was a lot more that I had control over than what I wanted to acknowledge. So there's an author, Rochelle Gutierrez, who writes about this idea of creative insubordination, and I'm sorry to all the district people in the room, but that is something that that I really began to do. So yes, I was required to use this rote curriculum, and I was required to plan with a woman who wanted to teach calculator tricks, and so I showed up to those meetings and nodded, and I was like, yes, please send me those plans, and then I promptly went home and planned my own lessons based on NCTM standards and based on a much higher bar for mathematics than what the curriculum was expecting my children to do. And because of all of that, I actually, like little me in my first year of teaching, my students scored the highest of any in the building, and at that time, where the way accountability measures were, my class's scores got our school what's called safe harbor because they so outperformed other people's expectations. So I say all that to be like, it was not my students, it was me. And that my locus of control turned out to be much larger than what I thought it was. And so how can I keep myself from doing that again? I developed all those systems to watch myself and figure out how to constantly improve. And it wasn't just an idea of like, oh, I should analyze, but I literally like built a schedule of I will watch this period of time on video every single day. Again, that might not look like that for you, but I think building out really concrete ways to analyze and improve our teaching is essential. So you're gonna do the same thing. that you just did a second ago with the second vignette. Again, I'm going to give you a minute to read and gather your thoughts silently, and then I'll let you know when it's time to talk with your neighbors. You can go ahead and start talking with your group. I'm going to give you about 1 more minute. All right, so bringing us back together. I want us to talk through this teacher and kind of decompose this lie a little bit. So how is the teacher in this vignette abdicating responsibility? Or who are they implying is responsible? Yes?
The kid in her class that can't handle it.
Yeah. So blaming students rather than acknowledging personal responsibility. What are the implications of these types of comments for students in schools? I'm going to go like 1, 2, 3. So you first. Yeah.
I think that the students are unaware of what they could be doing, and they aren't really given the chance to prove themselves. And they're always going to, if this teacher is blaming them for like their behavior or whatever it is that they can't handle, they're always going to kind of be held to those lower standards and expectations.
Yeah, so if you didn't hear that, she just talked about how these students are being held to lower standards and they're never given the opportunity to prove what they're capable of. I love that. Yes.
And that goes with what I was going to say is there's large equity implications because they're not being exposed to these higher levels of math. And if they're coming in with a skill deficit, you're just perpetuating that by not allowing them to develop those skills.
Yeah, so she was just sharing that this is actually like perpetuating current inequities because in addition to the fact that these students aren't getting exposed to complex mathematics, that's also meaning that if they are coming in behind, which we don't know from this vignette, but if they are, then they're not getting the opportunity to catch up. Was there one more? Yes.
What I was going to say is pretty much what they said.
Okay.
They're just like the bar is being set low, and because the teacher doesn't have confidence in these students, they're not going to have confidence in their own abilities, and therefore try less in any task that they are given.
Yeah. So it's this like nasty self-perpetuating cycle of low expectations beget low performance, and everyone's feeling pretty bad about the whole affair. So what's a different way that this teacher could have responded? Yes.
They could adjust it based on what they know about their students and then introduce it slowly and in smaller chunks just to see how it goes and then grow with it.
Yeah. So I don't know your name, but Autumn just said that they could adjust what they're doing and introduce what they want students to do in smaller chunks and grow with it. And actually, I would just like to say from personal experience that was pivotal to my my teaching is just realizing if I decompose what I want students to do into bite-sized knowledge and skills and prioritize what are the foundational pieces that people need in order to be able to engage with grade level mathematics, my kids blew my mind, like on a daily basis. So this next question, what might be the implications of this different response for students? Yes.
By breaking things down and making it easier for students to digest and putting it on their level, you're going to give them the capability to execute something they maybe didn't even know that they could, and giving them that confidence and helping them hone their skills in a way that they couldn't have in a different way possibly.
Yeah, so when we break down complex mathematics and make sure that our students have access points, we are going to give students access to math that like they may not have been exposed to otherwise. And I think the kind of, you were emphasizing what that might do for a student of realizing that they could do things that they hadn't thought they could do before. And then the other thing, and this isn't built into the question, but that also changes what we think is possible as teachers, because we start to realize we have all these proof points and that maybe the narratives we developed about our kids were false. Yes?
I was thinking that along the lines of those multiple entry points is giving students access to these tasks. In that way, students may find the strategy or skill that works best for them, and it might not be the skill that you are teaching them in that moment, but it is a skill that works and it answers and it completes the task for them, and they still get to that endpoint.
Yeah, so when we're acknowledging multiple entry points, then we're recognizing that, kind of like Robert said, of like turning power over to students, but realizing that there's lots of different ways to approach any given mathematical task, and acknowledging and celebrating all of those. So how could a teacher who's thinking and saying things like this keep themselves from continuing this behavior? Yeah. Yeah.
So, I noticed that, like, she can have students that would do it, like, even before she even, like, tried something like that with her classroom. So just, like, being conscious of, like, trying something first before, like, making a decision about what your students have the ability to do. So, like, I guess if you're working with everybody, the training to, like, try it first and then
here, what she's saying is try first before you assume what your kids are capable of. And I do think, I'm like, if there's nothing to take away from tonight, it's assume nothing about your children other than that they are capable of so much more than what you could possibly imagine. Yes?
If the teacher feels like they're not equipped to be effective, they could consider inviting the people who presented the professional development to come and model planning and implementing the lesson with them. It's bold, it's courageous, but it really shows that they're committed to growing professionally once they have the realization.
Yeah, I love that, because I think if you didn't hear that, that's instead of, like, if the teacher is feeling like, I don't know how to do this, then asking for help, so asking the people who ran the professional development to come support them in their classroom. And I love that, because I think that acknowledges something that a lot of us experience as teachers of, like, yeah, I would like to do this, but I don't know how. And so rather than blaming that on students, the response that takes ownership is to say, like, okay, so then let me get the help I need to figure out how to do this. So this is the third and final lie, and I am going to go fast through this so that you have time to work through the last vignette. But this is a picture of a teacher's lounge, and this is a lie that I found I'm most often engaged in, not to myself so much as it would come up in my conversations with others, and rather than just like a narrative that I told myself, it became a narrative that my entire team told each other. So this is when we would start to say, we can only really expect so much given their home situation. So in the communities that I worked in, a lot of times my students who struggled most academically had the most unpredictable home lives. And when I say unpredictable, I specifically just mean that these students didn't have a permanent living situation. And so they moved a lot, whether from relative to relative or home to home or whatever that meant, but they just didn't have one fixed address. And a lot of times these same students engaged in the most extreme behaviors in our classrooms. And so my grade team and I would start to tell this story when we would know it was important to get in touch with the family. We were having trouble doing so. And then it became this really negative cycle of whenever we would see a family member, we would just bombard them with all this negative stuff, which then made them not excited to talk with us in the future. And the interactions could be really stilted. And so both parties didn't really feel invested in continuing the relationship. So the impact of that for students was we began to lower our expectations for some of these students, and we would start to say in the teacher's lounge things like, oh yeah, that's blah, like that's whatever that student's name is. We can only expect so much given their home situation. The truth that is in opposition to that lie is that all families are invested in the success of their child. And I only have taught for 5 years, but I've literally never met a family that was not deeply, deeply motivated by and invested in their child. It's my responsibility to build a partnership with parents and guardians in service of student success. It is not their responsibility to build that with me. So when I unpack this lie, how did I abdicate responsibility? When I'm saying we can only expect so much given their home situation, I'm blaming the family rather than taking ownership of my behavior. For what are the implications of this for students? It meant that those students started to fall through the cracks. I lowered my expectations for them, and I frankly did not do as much to support them as I did my other children. For what's a different way to respond, much like Robert said earlier, I think blasting people with really positive interactions so that you, and building an authentic relationship. So for me, as a white woman who taught in a Black community with Black students and families, I had to recognize that there was a lot about the way I present that would not inspire trust. And so I had to accept that nobody owed me a relationship, and that if I wanted one, I needed to earn it. And so I opened my classroom so that people could come and do math with their kid whenever they wanted in our classroom. I communicated so much with parents that I think some of them may be like, who is this lady? Why won't she leave us alone? But I would send snapshots of student work. I would brag on my students to their parents all the time. So first of all, because I was genuinely excited about their work, but second of all, because I wanted parents to see how much I valued their child, so that if we did need to talk about something difficult, it was coming from an existing place of trust. Another thing, again, with my identity in the particular community I worked in, I started showing up. So I bought my gas on the way home from work at the gas station by my school. I went to basketball games. I showed up at picnics. Lots of different things I shared this with a class earlier, but the community I worked in, I wanted to have a pizza party for my kids one day, and I was told by the pizza companies I called that they would not send drivers to that neighborhood because it wasn't safe for their driver. And so for me as a middle-class white woman, it would have been really easy to feed into the perception that, like, I did not feel safe or welcome in that community. And so I was very intentional about showing up in ways that showed I was comfortable there. Again, I wasn't trying to, like, be in people's personal lives and be like, hello, new friends. But I did want to show them that that I valued their neighborhood. And what are the implications of this different response for students? What happened was that I built really meaningful relationships with parents, and so we became a partnership that kind of wrapped around the student's day, and it actually got to the point where I would bring up things that are going on in school, but parents would also contact me about things that were going on at home and ask for advice so that we could, as a team, figure out how we work together to support the kids that we're serving. And how can I keep myself from doing this again? I think this is two things. Number one, it's building in systems to check yourself. But the second thing is also being very aware of the conversations you participate in with your colleagues. Because this type of language I hear all the time. And so being willing to say to the people that you care about, that you work with, actually, I'm not sure if that's the whole story. Or offer a counter narrative of a parent or child to show that they can't be pigeonholed into this deficit-based box. Because we are almost out of time, I'll leave you with the last vignette to work with on your own, and there's also a closing reflection that you can work on.
So, I think because we're short on time, what we'll do is just kind of close it on out, if that's okay. So one of the hope for tonight was, you know, and first of all, you have to recognize Rebekah is a phenomenal teacher. And even, but the hope is how do we process, you know, the stories that are told, the lies that, and again, using intentionally the term lie is significant in this case because it helps us reflect on those stories that we do to sometimes injure people. Lies are weaponizing. And when we think of that, you know, how we tell these stories to ourselves and the stories play out over and over again, you know, it is structural. And oftentimes, it is how do we think about disrupting those structures? And I think the way we disrupt the structure is thinking about the lies we tell ourselves. And so I was very pleased in working with Rebekah to think about these lies that she tells herself and just kind of being kind of a critical friend in thinking about this process. And I know she used to, you know, I got to go back when she mentioned Rochelle Gutierrez and creative insubordination. If you've not heard of that term, I think sometimes we do engage in this process. Sometimes in schools, we may have to engage in creative insubordination. And it's not, you know, if it is in service of students, families, and communities. And so not in a way that is disruptive or mean, so to speak. So we really thank you so much for hanging in there with us. And I think this is where we're going to stop, and I'm going to turn it over to Beth, right?
Wow. So how many of you had a new thought today, a new aha, a move, a shift? Okay, you can't see that, but all their hands are in there. Come on, they were up. As soon as they turned around, they were down. I think that this was incredible, and I think if you haven't read the chapter, you're now starting to think about this idea of really self-reflecting on the ways in which we interact with one another. And I cannot thank you, both of you, so much for coming to Stevenson. We're super proud that you're here and you share this time with us. So give them a round of applause again. So, you can't have a get-together with educators without having a giveaway. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull names from here, and then we have a book, and if you get your name called, you must be present to win. You can come up and get your book. So we'll start with pre-K to 2. Robert, will you do the honors? He closed his eyes. And Ashley Hatz, come on down. So we have 3 through 5. Rebekah, will you do the honors for this one? Emily Jansen, come on down. 6 through 8. Robert. Robert, you've done this before. Allie Colt, come on down. And 9 through 12. Who do we have? Selena Cotton. Selena, come on down. This was live. I have to announce that Stevenson University did live stream this, as many of you know, and it will be recorded. But we also want to thank our live streaming crew for the first time live streaming an educational event. So it's not going to be the last time. Thank you all so much. Have a great night. Be safe. Stevenson students and graduates, can you come on down for a picture? Stevenson students and graduates, come on down for a picture. Hurry.
You want us in this?